Hello, everybody, and welcome to Behind the Camera. Here we are with episode 110 of Behind the Camera. As always, before we get into today's show, if you would like to follow Behind the Camera across social media, you can find my link tree in the description, which will take you to Instagram, TikTok, X, YouTube, and also has the link to where you can buy my book, Behind the Camera, The Journey So Far. This is available in both paperback and ebook and is free to read if you have Kindle Unlimited. If you want to see more of the behind the scenes side of the podcast, you can also support the show on Patreon. For £3 a month, you'll get access to extra content, including a Patreon exclusive series, your name added to the wall of patrons at the end of every episode of Behind the Camera, and much more. But now, getting into today's conversation. Today, my guest is author and TV writer Richard Sparks. I honestly don't think I've connected with a guest as much as I did with Richard in such a long time. I always try to keep my interviews informal and free-flowing, but this just felt like reminiscing with an old friend. From Richard's early work, collaborating with Rowan Atkinson and Cleese, two icons who I grew up watching, even to his gaming-inspired writing journey through his new rock series, and of course, a small chat about music. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you guys do too. So now, here's the interview. Richard, welcome to Behind the Camera podcast. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. How are we doing today?
Very well, thank you, Andy, and thank you very much for having me.
It is my absolute pleasure. So, you are a writer of, you've written for TV, you write books, and so let's get into that. Let's talk about your background first and how you got into writing, and then we'll kind of just sort of go from there.
Well, it depends how far back you want to go. I always loved books. My mum and dad always used to read to me and my sister at night, and as soon as I could read, I was just a bookworm. Absolutely loved it. Loved adventure stories, loved magic stories, otherworldly stories. And then, when I got to university, I had a roommate who actually went on to become a West End producer, and I used to leave him silly notes. We had a sitting room that we worked in and a separate bedroom each. But so there's a sort of common area, and the friends would come and play with us. And I used to leave silly notes. And so one day I just bumped into him, and I said, "Where are you going?" That's the second year. And he said he's going to audition for a review. I said, "Oh, what's that?" That sort of thing. And he said, "Well, it's comedy sketches like not the 9 o'clock news. No, that wasn't around then. Monty Python, or what's that one? Beyond the Fringe." And I knew those sketches, and I loved them. I was a huge Python fan as a student. And he said, "You write funny stuff, come along." So I did, and of course the bloody director made me audition. Last thing I wanted to do. So I made a complete pig's ear of it. I had to come into a room and get an apple off a tree that had a maggot in it and eat it. And oh God, and if you gave that to Rowan Atkinson, he'd still be doing it. He'd just go on forever. But that's because he's good at it, and I'm not. I never wanted to be an actor. But anyway, so the director said, "Well, Peter says that you write stuff, so come along to the first meeting." Anyway, went to the first meeting a few days later, and there was Mel Smith was in it. That was his first year, and various other talented comedy thespians, all very witty, and after a bit, the director Tony Cottrell said, "Well, has anyone got any material?" And the silence fell across the room. And I said, "Well, I've got something." So I'd spent the previous few days writing a history of drama from the Greeks through to Latin, and then medieval mystery plays, and what's they called, Renaissance comedies, and all that sort of stuff, up to Gothic things in the 19th century, and up to modern sort of Pinteresque parodies. And I just wrote that's like a half-hour show I just written. And he said, "Oh, well, let's read it." So I just read it, so started reading everything. And he said, "Oh, well, that's our show." And so, and then other people contributed. One guy Anthony Carey had a wonderful idea of a backwards melodrama which started with a pile of bodies on stage. And then one that stands up and pulls a knife out of him and says, "Go on and never call me mother," or something corny like that. And the whole thing goes backwards. So everyone else contributed gleefully. But that was my first start. So they made me be in it, which was great fun. I mean, everyone looked after me and said, "Look, come on, you're not as bad as all that. Relax, have a good time." Which actually led later to 40 years later to my audiobooks for my fantasy series. In that the producer here in Hollywood, or West Los Angeles, when I went to talk to him about it, he said, "Well, you should do it." I said, "But there are lots of good English actors over here. Let's get one of them." He said, "No, everyone wants to hear what the author sounds like."
Yeah.
And because I'd done a bit on stage as a student, I didn't really have any fear, which is also the sign of an amateur, by the way, because real actors get terrified because they think at a bigger depth than, a sort of amateur. So I did my own audiobooks, which was great fun. And the producer is the same guy who did the audiobooks for the Game of Thrones,
Oh, okay.
Fred Sanders. So he's, really good and really encouraging, and he's a good reader himself. And he said, "Just go for it. They just want to hear what the author sounds like. You don't have to be the world's best, this, that, or the other." And of course, I know how the words sound in my head.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of joy. I'd never really thought about that connection all the way back. But yeah, I mean, when people say you should try this or do that, you give it a go. And then when I left university, I eventually got a job working in Welsh television, writing the things that the announcers say between programs and making trailers, which was
Yes.
quite dull. But I spent 2 years in a prefabricated hut by a golf driving range in Pontcanna Fields, Cardiff, working for HTV, and learnt a lot and get to meet people occasionally. One day I was just going through the reception, and there was an older gentleman sitting there in a beautiful camel overcoat, very distinguished looking, and I sort of did a double. It was Ray Milland. I've got what? Oscar-winning actor for The Lost Weekend, and he was actually a cavalry soldier. Uh, Professional before he became an actor. And so I plucked up the courage and went up to him and said, "Oh, Mr. Milland, is anyone looking after you? Can I help you?" And he sort of muttered and mumbled, said, "Oh, thank you, I'm fine." And he died, not much later than that. But I mean, wow, get to meet real people like that is I mean, it's such a thrill what the Rowan Atkinsons and Ray Millands of the world do for us.
Absolutely.
What they bring into our lives is just great. And of course, as your writer, your job is to supply them with something they can say,
Yeah.
without which they're standing on stage going, "Why am I here?"
Definitely, and it's quite interesting, especially when, you're doing all this work for all these people who they're globally known, and then, you bump into them randomly, and it's just like a sort of like, well, just, a normal person like you or I. Like it's quite amazing, sort of the difference you see, when you see somebody on screen compared to real life. It's just like, yeah, normal. They're normal people. It's just them doing a job, especially a job that, you've laid down for them in terms of what you've been writing.
It is. It's extraordinary, and yeah, we're all starstruck. Actually, I think I went to see Rowan's show in London, and he just been. This is after not the 9 o'clock news. So by then he was well known, because when I first wrote for him, he was a nobody. He was a student, just straight out of university. And I go, that's what backstage I felt. This is my old chum, and I thought, wow, I felt starstruck, which is great. I mean, over here in LA, you meet all sorts of people, and so after a bit, it stops being, being a thing, because you just get used to it, and they don't want you to be. They don't want to be on all the time anyway. But they are special. I mean, they really have an effect on us.
Definitely, and it's actually quite funny you say that. Like the comparison from the likes of LA to here in Northern Ireland, it's, when you hear of a celebrity of like any kind of level is spotted somewhere, but you guarantee it's going to make national news. Now, obviously, national news is it's still quite a small thing because of the size of the country, but it's whether it's somebody filming something up in Belfast or something, it's like, oh, they were spotted, and you'll see it on so many outlets, and I love that. I think it's really nice. But then, when you compare it to someone like somewhere like LA, it's literally like, well, that's just, we just call that Tuesday, like, you know what I mean?
Not really. Well, no, yes and no. I mean, you don't really see stars. Well, you do, but not very often,
Mhm.
unless you're actually on the set or
Okay.
on the lot. Um, and then they're in the craft services getting their lunch.
Hmm.
And oh, look, it's so and so. I
Yeah.
remember one of the very first times I went to Gelson's supermarket here in Century City, and it was Burt Lancaster lining up at the. Dates me, but it's the early 90s, and he was pretty much retired, and he was just getting his shopping.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's it. Just like you or I would like, and that's like,
yeah,
I think that's incredible. But you mentioned Rowan Atkinson a few times there, and so you wrote the very famous sketch, "The Schoolmaster," for
I did.
Rowan
I
Atkinson
did. Yeah,
back in, if I'm correct, 1978, roughly.
78 it was.
78,
Yeah,
yes,
all
and he
those years
performed that
ago.
in 1979. So how did
Well, he
that?
performed it first in
I
78.
performed it first in 78. Yeah.
Oh yeah, in a little theatre that called the Hampstead Theatre, which is actually very the top
Hmm.
fringe theatre. Michael Rudman directed it. He ran it. Wasn't a very good director. He was a nice man, but he didn't quite have the sensibility. In
Hmm.
fact, my friend Peter Wilson was also in that show, and Michael kept trying to persuade him to come on and sing Ken Dodd's Happiness with a French accent. A-penis, A-penis. And Peter's going, oh, God, really? And we eventually talked him out of it. But anyway, Rowan was in that. The whole idea was to build a show around Rowan.
Hmm.
And Peter, who I'd done sketches with as a student, and his Peter's then wife Ellie. It wasn't very. I mean, the reviews are pretty terrible. But Martin Lewis, who lives here now in LA, and has just written a book about Brian Epstein, which is because he worked for the Beatles.
Hmm.
From uh, so Martin Lewis and John Cleese came to see the show, and Martin was always wanting to put new people in the charity shows. So and Cleese was a little bit. He just wanted to get the old gang together again. But when he saw Rowan, he realised that, well, it kind of is the old gang because he was Oxbridge.
Yeah.
Uh, and so he was invited to do, and Rowan called me up at my house in London in the summer of '79 and said, John Cleese just called and he's asked me to be in his new charity show, and can I do the Schoolmaster? So I said, yes, you can. I mean, it's an incredible series of tiny little coincidences why that sketch is now a well-known piece and not in the bottom drawer with the other ones, which have come and gone or whatever. Because if Martin hadn't seen it, and John hadn't invited him to do it, and Roger Grafe directed it, the show, and it was 4.5 hours long, and
Wow.
Roger fought tooth and nail for Rowan's sketch performance to be in the film. And
Hmm.
everyone's saying, no, he's a complete nobody. You've got to have Peter Cook and Dudley Moore and Billy Connolly and all these other people who. But Roger fought tooth and nail for it, with the result that Rowan. He did steal the show, by the way, on stage. I mean, I'd seen him do it before, as a, and then when he came on and did it in front of a crowd who had no idea who he was, because this is before not the 9 o'clock news.
Yeah.
He walked on stage an unknown and walked off a star, which is really not fun to be a part of because I saw him come on and go, oh right, here we go. You know, I knew he had the chops, and it was just a bullseye. So
Yeah.
that was really nice, and yeah, it was just funny writing it for him because I wrote for Peter Wilson, who I'd done sketches with as a student, and Richard Curtis was Rowan's writing partner. So it's kind of like two different teams. So I just woke up one morning with a bit of a hangover, I confess, and thought, I've got to write something for the new guy, as I thought of him. Because I mean, I can't just write for my friend. That's not very polite. So I sat down and started writing a list of silly names, and then it morphed into the sketch grew, and I typed it up and gave it to him, and he, oh, thank you, and sort of wandered off, and that was it. That's all you ever get from Rowan. He just goes off and does his job.
Mm.
And then, but I thought, well, at least he didn't tell me to. This was rubbish, How dare you think I could do your? Yeah, he's a lovely guy, and so It was the first rehearsal he did it in. It was an empty room with the director and me. I don't even know if Richard Curtis was there in the
Oh,
room that
wow.
day. And Rowan filled a room with invisible schoolboys. Extraordinary. So I
Yeah.
thought, wow, that works.
I haven't watched it. Like, he delivered it in a way that only he could do.
You're
Like,
absolutely
just,
right. You know, when I
yeah.
thought you never tell actors how you wrote something or what you're thinking of. But when I wrote it, I remember thinking of John Cleese coming on with a pile of exercise books and firing them out into the audience and going, name, which would have been one joke. And I don't even, and, yeah, but exercise books flying into the audience might have been funny,
Yeah.
but it would still be, yeah, then you'd have to clear them up. And what I didn't think it through, but I didn't say that to it. I may never have told anyone this story till now. I don't know. And when Rowan came on stage with his clipboard, and he did it slowly, and he stood there and took his time over every name. I'm going, uh, 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 what? Oh, oh, wait a minute. Oh, oh, this could work.
Yeah.
And he just ate every name alive. And then it turns into a kind of nominative determinism thing where the people with different names do different things. In fact, anyway, we can't talk about that. But yeah, it was just great to see that, and I never expected it to surface again until he got the phone call, and then I went to meet him in the pub, the captain's cabin in the Haymarket, I think it is, or around that corner, and walked down to the theatre and met John Cleese, and the rest is mystery.
It's incredible. And, so then obviously, you went on to, work on like sketches such as Not the 9 O'Clock News, with Rowan Atkinson and a lot of all of these other, amazing comics. So what was it like writing for a sketch show specifically? Because obviously you've got like, so with the actors working on sketch shows, there's like so much versatility. Is it a case where you might just give like a sort of brief kind of two line, this is the scene, this is roughly what you're talking about, or is it a bit more detailed than just setting the scene?
Oh, you want to give them, you don't get a first. Oh, wait a minute. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. You want to give them the sketch as good as you can get it, and then
Okay.
rewrite it, and get your notes and all that. The I'm not naturally very good at writing um, satirical comedy.
Mhm.
I'm not up to the level of well, I mean, some of the writers on that show were much more kind of thought like I think more off the wall, more surrealist, more post Python.
Yeah.
They were much more on onto the to the daily story, and there's some really good writers. Later, Armando Iannucci is an incredible writer, and
Mhm.
he's really got his finger on the pulse of the time. But for example, one that I wrote, I just happened to go to the office and to talk to John Lloyd, the producer, and Ruby Wax was in there, an unknown Ruby Wax, and she read a sketch about the rugby players who crashed in the Andes and had been reduced to cannibalism. And she read it, and John said, "Oh, thank you very much." And that she left, and then she said to me, "Well, what do you think of that?" He could, we could both tell that it hadn't worked. And I said, "Well, she's got the joke the wrong way round." And he says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, the joke should be that they had to eat the airline food. They were reduced to eating the airline food because they'd eaten all the passengers." And he said, "Great, write it." So I rewrote the whole. I mean, I didn't even look at her text. I just wrote the sketch, which Rowan was the interviewer, and Mel and what's his name, Chris Langham were the two people on being interviewed. But that was just you take the opportunity that's there. This is it. And I thought, well, that's a sketch, but this is what needs to be done to it. And you know, script editing is another string to one's bow that you use as a writer when you're not getting paid to write scripts. You get paid to help other people get their scripts ready for prime time.
It sounds like it's quite challenging to write a particular sketch because you're working in that kind of 3 to 6 minute kind of range, but you've got to have the story down. You've got then when it comes to filming the actors, have to sort of be able to tell that story in the best way that they can in such a short period of time. But it's interesting because you do get those really short sketches that are more memorable than more, say, like long form episodic shows, I
Yeah,
think.
John Lloyd. I mean, all credit to John and Sean Hardy, his co-producer. John is the the comic genius behind not the 9 o'clock news, and also, by the way, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which
Right.
he knocked into shape with Douglas, his roommate, Douglas Adams, for the radio original, and went on to do things like produce Blackadder and QI. He's just done the series of QI, which starts with the letter X. So that's got to be what, 24th season.
Mhm.
And also Spitting Image, he created that. So he's the great comedy director of our time. And one of his favorite sketches from Not the 9 O'clock News is really short. It's set in a Swedish chemist shop or pharmacy or whatever it is. And in comes Mel as an English person and wants to buy some deodorant. And Rowan, as the salesman, says, "Ball or aerosol?" And Mel says, "Well, I want it for both." And John just adores that sketch. And it's only 20 seconds long. It works.
Yeah.
So
Like,
uh, some of them are shorter than others. If you look at Saturday Night Live, the sketches are all quite long
yeah.
because they have to be kind of because they're doing it well live. But I tell you the thing, if you really want to see good live comedy, look at Sid Caesar's show, The Show of Shows,
Mhm.
where they were doing 5 minute sketches live, and they're so good, so well written. Well, obviously by Neil Simon and Mel Brooks and
Yeah.
Larry Gelbart, all the great writers, and with Carl Reiner, who I knew well, and Imogen Coker. I mean, there's just, I mean, look at there's one sketch on YouTube. This is your story, which is their take of This Is Your Life,
Oh,
in which
yes,
Sid
yes.
Caesar's in the audience, and they drag him up out of the audience. They do his life story, and it's all live. And Carl is valiantly holding the thing together as the whole thing descends into extremely well thought out choreographed chaos. And and Sid Caesar really doesn't want to be there, tries to run away, and I mean that was in the early 50s in black and white.
Incredible.
So it's they were good.
Yeah,
Uh,
like because I think it's something, especially when it comes to British comedy in particular, like sketch shows. It's something that you still see reflected today. Now, I think the older stuff holds its weight a little bit more in some ways, but like, I mean, I remember so much. Like, even when I was a kid, probably younger than I should have been, watching some things of what not the 9 o'clock news, but there was that and the young ones particularly that I
yeah,
kind of grew up watching, and like it just was. But
it's a
the
lot of
humor in it, it's so simple and it's just phenomenal. Like, I mean, I can name you a couple of sketches from not the 9 o'clock news that stick out to me, and one of them it's like a darts game. I know it's Mel Smith, and I'm not sure who the
Mel and
other
Griff,
actors. Yeah,
Mel and Griff,
Mel
yeah.
Griff. Yep, and it's just there's like that, and they'll reach down and grab like a double vodka or
And then
something. And
looking the other way and throwing the darts if they didn't care, while the other guys, yeah, it's really simple stuff, but just love.
yeah,
And of course, in those days, there were 4 channels.
yeah,
BBC was two was new. The parents would watch the news, and the kids would watch on BBC Two, watch the anti-news. So it got massive audiences, much bigger audiences than Python, which was be shown at 5:30 one day and 10:30 the next week, and was all over the place. But
yeah.
because it wasn't very well scheduled or shepherded. But by the time they got to doing not the 9 o'clock news, of course, they had the budget in those days. There's no
Mhm.
budget for sketch comedy anymore because you've got to
No,
pay the writers. And also, they went out onto the street, as did Python, and could film outside. But the thing I'd like to say is that comedy is a young person's game, and that there are so many great comedians now in their 20s and 30s.
Mhm.
I'm just extraordinarily talented in England and in Britain and um, in the States here. And every time I see them, I go, yeah, the new guys, they're just reinventing the wheel and they're doing it. It's just so refreshing because it's always this new insight onto what we've already known. I mean,
yeah.
if the old jokes were all we had, well, that would be sad. And it's not. it's like a challenge coming from the next sort of human beings saying, this is what needs to be thought about. This is what needs to. And anyway,
No, I
I'm
completely
always
agree though.
enjoy the
Like,
new stuff.
because like stand-up comedy now, it's you can see where the influences are, and the influences are coming from like 1900s. Like they're
Oh
coming
yeah,
from earlier days of comedy, but of course then there's the sort of you have to take into consideration the political climate of things and political correctness because like I feel like back years ago uh, comedy was a little bit more uninhibited, and then kind of as years went on into the 2000s it was like, well, you can't say this, you can't joke about this, you can't joke about this. And I kind of feel like slowly coming up into the 2020s it's sort of like people are kind of going back on that now, and people are sort of more like edgy humor, but like in a tasteful sort of manner, I suppose.
well,
And
it does suggest that the pendulum swings, doesn't it?
yeah.
Because in the old days there were censors and you couldn't say things, for example, the Lady Chatterley trial, which I think was 1960, and the prosecuting attorney or whatever they're called in England said, would you like your wife or your servants to read this book? It just dates the trial beautifully, but times change. And yeah, so then it became all for, the Lenny Bruce influence and the Richard Pryor influence, and
Mhm.
comedy became very foul-mouthed. And who was the guy? Andrew Dice Clay was, obscenity on wheels. I didn't find him particularly funny myself, but he was obviously very gifted.
Mhm.
And Robin Williams, who I met, Steve Martin's a great hero. I mean, all these
Mhm.
brilliant people come along and reinvent the wheel. I mean, Steve Martin coming on stage in a white suit when everyone else is hippies and doing this sort of wild and crazy guy stuff, and so tongue in cheek about himself, and so
Yeah.
much energy, and so much squareness and unhipness about it that it was just absolutely beautiful. I mean,
Yeah, like
he's just great.
that's something that I love about like, and this is like the kind of UK US comparison, and it's like Robin Williams and Steve Martin for they're probably two of the best examples. Like in the UK, they're probably more well known for just being actors, but like in the US, it's like more people would remember them as comedians first before or around like kind of the same time, I suppose. But like
Yeah.
they'd be more known for their stand-up comedy in the States compared to the US, I think, or the UK, I think. And like
Depends how far back you go, because look,
yeah,
I
well,
wish I
this is
had my
true.
banjo out. But if it hadn't been for Steve Martin, I'd probably never have taken up the banjo. But my friend Marty Lanham is one of the top luthiers in
Hmm.
Nashville, and he builds beautiful handmade guitars. And when Steve Martin was starting, and he drove me around Nashville, and we were looking. He said, oh, Steve Martin used to perform there, and it was a small room with a window. And Steve Martin's job was to stand on stage by the window with his banjo and doing whatever shtick he was to an empty room.
Amazing.
And people go past and think, oh, there's somebody on it. And then they go in. And by the time they got in, they'd be too embarrassed to leave. So he started off playing to a totally empty room in Nashville. And then, of course, Marty, the word quickly spread that there was something special here. And one performance, Marty described that Steve Martin just went on a riff about food. I took the entire audience out down the street following him, playing the banjo. I think I may be making it up about playing the banjo, but and down to the street and bought everyone McDonald's. And then they went back inside and he continued. Which is, I hope it's true because it's a great story.
Yeah, for sure.
But he's a real hero of mine. Yeah, just anyone who can do what he's done is we're grateful to have them.
For sure, and like Robin Williams was like that as well. Like, I mean, I seen
Oh,
a couple of his
he
stand-up
was
specials
amazing.
over the last few years, and it just like nobody else could have done it like him. Like it was
Absolutely, you couldn't be more.
just
Look, it's
you
going to be
know
44 years since the last. Well, we're getting the Olympics here in 2028. So 1984, uh, I was over here. I was working on a series, and we went to the comic strip, yes,
mhm.
Bud Friedman's comic strip, and just to see what was on. And there was Robin Williams standing by the bar, all by himself, looking thoughtful. So I plucked up the courage and went up to, because I'd just been talking about him when I was in England with Peter Cook. And so I went up and said, "Hello, I'm a friend of Peter Cook's, and he's a great fan of yours. And are you going to perform tonight?" He says, "I got to see you." And he said, "Oh, well, no, I've already done my act." Because by this time he was famous, and he would
Hmm.
go to the small places to hone his material and just to keep his hand in.
Yeah.
Because he's like Rowan, he just completely comes alive on stage. And then he sort of said, "Well, look, don't tell anyone, but I'm going to come back tomorrow night." So I told everyone I knew in town, which was another couple, my wife's school friend and her husband. And we went, and the next night it was this classic setup. There's a small room, maybe 30 people in there at round tables, and drinking beer and eating whatever. And there was a, this was in the days before stand-up comedy was particularly honed, and it was a girl standing on stage, dying the death, being very sweet and saying things like, "So, anyone here from the Valley?" And, trying to get something from the audience. This was in the days before people had a really honed set.
Hmm.
And so she shuffled off. And then Bud came on stage and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have a treat for you, Robin Williams." Of course, we knew it was coming, on that. And everyone in the room went, "What?" And he came on, and as I said, it was the Olympics. And he did the Pakistani hubcap and base stealing baseball team combined, just off the top of your head. All this stuff coming out, no microphone, running around the audience, stealing bases, like throwing things and getting people out and tagging people, all with Pakistani accents, and stealing hubcaps while they were at it, as well as stealing bases, which is a thing they do in baseball.
Yeah.
And I thought I was going to die. Which is, I mean, I absolutely love it when a comedian reduces me to
Oh,
pain.
yeah.
And then afterwards, I went up to say hello because he was by the bar again. I said, and he said, "Oh, thank you very much." He was very sort of,
Hmm.
within himself. Um, but what a privilege to be there to see
For
that.
sure. Oh my God. Yeah. Like, because he was that his stand up was more of like a show and a performance as opposed to just jokes. It was like obviously he had his jokes, a lot of quips and a few stories, but it was how he acted everything out, like with his accents
Yeah,
and his character work, and like in you mentioned like a Pakistani baseball team. Like I mean, it's like if in this day and age you probably couldn't make that joke or do that sort of like sketch on stage,
oh, but
but
it was benign. There wasn't any
yeah,
racial comedy in there.
well
It
that's
was fun.
exactly
The
yeah.
Pakistani players were enjoying the hell out of stealing the hubcaps and the bases. It wasn't, but any kind of malice
Exactly.
or
Well,
talking down.
that's I think is something like part of the charm that Robin Williams had was that he could have like done an impression of absolutely anybody, and it was not about race, but it was so contextualized to what he was talking about and the character, and everything just came together and made sense.
Yeah,
And like it's like I said, I just don't think there was anybody else who could have done it the way that he did it. Just he was just honestly, he was absolutely fantastic as a comic, like 100%.
yeah. I mean, there was a real kindness about him in his comedy. I found, even when he was skewering people. But there's Alexei Sale once told me that they had Robin Williams on at the comic strip in England,
Hmm.
and Alexei said, "Oh, I wiped the floor with him." I don't know whether that was, but he didn't say it in any mean way. He just meant
Yeah, yeah.
I managed to keep up with the guy. But Alexei again was brilliant. He was an art student.
Hmm.
At the same time, my wife was an art student at Chelsea, and he was very shy, had long hair, and was thin and a beard. And then the next time she saw him, he was on stage as a sort of like a pocket cannonball whizzing around in his hat and his suit and his big arms and he had a sketch about a Ford Cortina. Do you remember that?
I don't
Uh,
know, not that
uh,
particular one. No.
well, that was my wife's Cortina because she was the only student who had a car,
Oh, right.
and it was the only thing that had any heat in it. So they would sit in the Cortina with the engine on, trying not to get cold.
Yeah.
And she's sure that when got a lovely Cortina, was a tribute to her, Ford Cortina, whether that's true or not. But Alexis, again, he's a massive, a delightful guy and a huge talent. You know,
Yeah, yeah. I think the first thing I ever seen Alexi Salem was the Young Ones,
yeah,
and because this had this recurring character, it was like the landlord, but then it was like the every single brother or relation of the landlord. I can't
but
remember the name off the top of my head. It was like Bolofsky or something.
probably.
Yeah, and but what I particularly liked about it, it was the fact that he would, he would come in, he would do his like lines, and he would just be like, you would think he was borderline rabid in terms of like his character, but then everything would just stop. It would be the spotlight on him, and he would just deliver in like his, in his Scouse accent, just a random monologue, and then it would go right back to in the midst of the
Yeah.
chaos of the episode, and like that's just
Well, they
that.
really got the hang of it. They really got the hang of stretching what the show was about
Oh
and
yeah.
what comedy did. A friend of mine who's a well-known comedy actor said he saw the first episode of The Young Ones. He thought, well, that's my career done. We're finished. This is the new lot. It wasn't true in his case, but still, it was, it came along and it was like a cannonball going across the deck of a ship, just blew everything else out of the water. Uh,
Definitely, So in terms of then like having worked like so much with UK comedy and US comedy, like how would you compare the two in terms of like styles, especially going over the years?
oh my God, I don't think I would.
Hmm?
I mean, there are a lot of British comedians who've gone to America and failed, like the Bruce Forsyths.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of had this conversation with someone recently. It's a bit tricky because I felt myself getting into trouble. I think it's a sort of a class thing in that the traditional, like the Wheel Tappers and Shunters Social Club, the traditional British stand-up Bernard Manning types,
Mm-hmm.
Colin Crompton, talented though all those guys were, they had a, a, a shtick going that didn't work over there.
Yeah.
Didn't seem to it was difficult to understand. Whereas the university wits, which is a tradition going back hundreds of years, by the way, um, which has been the Not the 9 o'clock news, the people, I mean, uh, Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, and all those people who were influenced by Spike Milligan, Peter Sellers, that level translated across the Atlantic much better. Certainly, Python was a huge hit. And the stories about how Python, I mean, even got to America. I mean, it's extraordinary. But once that hit, a few years after the show had finished in England, that really worked.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get those wonderful films like Life of Brian, for which George Harrison mortgaged his house to pay for it. If
Really?
it hadn't been for if it hadn't been for George Harrison, there would have been no
Wow.
Life of Brian. Well, because I mean, Eric tried to sell it to everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and George Harrison said to him, "I'd love to read it. Can I read it?" And then he called up the next day and said, "I'll pay for it."
Brilliant.
It's
Wow.
got to be a true story because Eric told that on stage recently. He wouldn't lie in public.
Definitely no. It would never lie on stage.
Uh,
No, I never knew that. That's incredible. And yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, there was obviously a little bit of controversy that came with that film over the years after it came out, but
oh, have you seen the debate? It's still up there with Malcolm Muggeridge and some bishop completely trying to put these upstarts in their place and accusing them of blasphemy.
oh
Of
no,
course, it's not about Jesus. It's about someone who isn't
yeah,
Jesus. That's why it works. It all. I mean, apparently, it started with a quip at an interview, and someone said, "What's your next film going to be after the Holy Grail?" And Eric said, "Jesus Christ, Lust for Glory." That's just on the topic. But anyway, whether that's how it actually happened. Anyway,
yeah,
so without the people like George Harrison and the supporters, that would never have been seen. And it is an
yeah.
absolutely brilliant film. A friend of mine was a comparative did lectures on comparative religion. He spoke Sanskrit and Aramaic and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he would always start his lectures off by showing the first minute and a half of The Life of Brian, where the wise men go to the wrong stable. Because he's talking to people who are Islamic, what are they
Yeah,
called, Muslims or Christians or Jews or whatever. So there's room in there for all sorts of tensions. And he just totally diffused the whole thing by getting onto that. And then he could addresses serious subjects that he was
That's
talking about.
it's a good way to do it for sure.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, absolutely. And dear,
um,
dear old Terry Jones was a chum. They're doing,
yeah.
by the way, I think it's this month, Colwyn Bay, where Terry was from,
Hmm.
is having the unveiling of a statue in his honor,
Oh, amazing.
for which, we all chipped in a bit of money to have it built. And it's a statue of him naked at the organ, with his hair sticking up. And I think Michael Palin and Terry Gilliam are going to be there, and various friends and family and stuff.
Mm,
I unfortunately will be out of the country, but he's yeah, I mean, got great people.
yeah.
I was
You
adored
just
both of
know
them.
as well that like he would have loved that, like especially that exact sort of way it's done. He would have loved that 100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
But I never really got to work with him apart from Secret Policeman's Ball where we did different bits. But he last time I saw him, he was actually standing in our kitchen dining room there. He was getting very excited because um, he'd worked out the actual identity of the actual knight from the Knight's Tale in Chaucer that it was based on, because he's a Chaucerian scholar,
mhm.
and he was terribly excited because he'd found a manuscript with some coloured in cross, the blazons or whatever they have on their costume. His
Yeah.
Jupoon, I remember that's the word he said. And he said, well, this is clearly something to somebody or other from Rochester in Kent, and it's that's the light. It's got to be based on him.
Yeah.
Just wonderful enthusiasm about his pet subject.
Of course, and he was a writer as well. He wrote books as well, didn't he? Like
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure he had
children's
a few
books.
fantasy series, children's books. Yes, I remember. I can't. Well, for the life of me, I can't remember this. I think I was only about 13 when I read it. But I remember reading one of the series back in school, and like just not part of any curriculum, but just during like library sessions, and
Yeah.
very very good writer as well.
Oh,
And
he certainly was. He and Michael wrote together.
mhm.
Yeah, he was absolutely delightful. And this was actually this was probably the day after Douglas Adams's funeral, because
Oh,
Douglas lived here and died here
mhm.
up in Santa Barbara, and so all his friends came from England, um, and then Terry turned up the next day here. Yeah, Douglas went much too soon.
Mm.
Very sad.
No, it's I know it's like a lot of people like in that kind of field have as well, like like the well, we mentioned Robin Williams, Graham Chapman as well from Python 2, like it's
Yeah,
no, it's a shame, but I mentioned Terry being a writer, and obviously you want to talk about your new rock series, your series of books. The idea for this came from you being an RPG gamer, am I correct in saying?
oh yeah, absolutely. Uh,
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Much
Like,
less now that I've started writing my own adventures, but I really got into role play. And I can, again, credit to Douglas Adams, because I remember saying to him, Douglas, why do you spend all your time playing video games? You shouldn't you be writing? He's saying, oh, no, look, you should try them and see. And so, of course, he was always ahead of his time.
Mhm.
Years later, through my love of poker, I got to playing internet poker and going to some of the World Series events, and then realizing that there are more games out here than getting your ass kicked on a poker site, which is and discovering role-playing games. And when you get to the big multiplayer online things where you got 24 people in your headphones and you're all galloping around getting up to mischief, that's wow, this is amazing. So
Yeah.
that was many, many happy nights when I should have been writing, playing playing these games, and one thing led to another. What would it be like to be someone like this a heroic young battle mage with a magic staff, galloping off and getting off to mischief? And it's not set in a game. Other people have done,
Mhm.
like the Dungeon Crawler Carl series now, set in a game that he's invented. Mine's actually, three people who won the world championship of this particular game, and the next thing you know, he's standing on a field for real life, in real life, with a crappy sword and a shield, going, what, where am I, and where are the other two, and what the hell's going on, and I'm being chased by wolves. So he has to learn, having just been world champion, he's now a complete noob, has to start again. And of course, there's a reason for it all, and that unfolds, and there's a story and an explanation, and then and a big quest that he needs to solve. And when I set out to write it, I didn't realize it was actually going to have quite a lot of comedy in it. Um, but that's just sort of natural after a while. And I
Yeah.
realized that comedy and adventures have a lot in common, which is things going wrong. So there's a tone to it that is, um, it's not like Terry Pratchett, which is slightly more tongue in cheek, but it's things can happen naturally that
Yeah.
are just, this is, whoa.
And
So,
would you say it's like
uh,
a fantasy series as well?
oh no, you've unfrozen.
Oh, sorry, I think cut out there a bit. Um, we all good? Ah, we're back now.
Uh, we're
Sorry, I
back.
don't know what happened there. It just seemed to freeze on my end there. But
See, that's the mystery of gaming.
that, yeah, 100%. I could fully relate. But yeah, I'll just kind of start it out at this bit anyway. But so
Yeah, so that led from one thing to another. There are four books in the series. The third one came out a few months ago, and the last one comes out in November this year. So, and that wraps up that story. And then who knows? There may be more to come.
yeah, what was what's the game itself that you were playing that sparked the idea?
Probably one of the Elder Scrolls
Elder
numbers,
Scrolls, yeah.
or I love those, and also um, a Dragon Age in the older days. But
Mm.
I like Mass Effect. Basically, sword and sorcery
Wow.
was my wheelhouse. I
Yeah.
liked some of the space ones, like as I said, Mass Effect 3 was brilliant, um, and some other games I played. But basically, kept coming back to that. And then when I started writing my own, I didn't need to play games anymore because I'm writing my own and discovering what's happening. Because the problem with games, and I had this argument with a friendly argument, not one of these, but discussion with a writer of video games at a conference, and she was valiantly pushing back against me saying, look, there are only two kinds of quests, which is what all gamers know it. There's kill or FedEx, go and kill something or go and fetch something.
Hmm.
And that's all the quests that there are. So, but in a book, it's what the fuck is the quest? Where are we going with this? Well, here are the clues. What does any of this mean? And so it unfolds. In the third book, I give you the answer in chapter 9, and you're looking at it, or the hero's looking at it going, saying, well, I can see what it says, but what does it mean? It's a
Mm.
few lines of verse, some simple words. And the wise woman says to him, well, you've been told, there's your answer. You've got to go and figure it out. Yeah, I always believe my job is to entertain as a writer. I'm not writing, demanding, difficult literary fiction. I mean, I hope my books are well written, but I'm an entertainer. I want to give you a good time.
Of course, yeah. And what I find interesting about that is the fact that when you have like an RPG, the you almost as the player dictate the story, because a lot more of these games now, when you look at like Baldur's Gate 3, for example, like a D&D based game, there's I couldn't tell you exactly how many endings there are, but there's multiple endings. There's so many different ways to get to every ending. The story kind of, you dictate what that is. Whereas obviously if you're writing a story, you still have to put that, you still have to sort of put the climax in at some point. You have to put like the resolution in at some point. And do you ever
Well,
think,
you got to use the skills of story structure.
yeah,
What I loved about gaming is that you're the hero of your own story.
yeah,
It's not like being in a movie where you're watching an actor representing the hero. You can go anywhere. You can do anything. You can build a house. You can sit fishing at the side of a stream, as well as having adventures, as well as rescuing people or plundering treasure or crafting things. Yeah, so there's the whole world in there. But after a bit, when you come out of the other end of it, I found that it's going through all this led me to the
hmm,
books.
yeah.
Well, and I find the books of more open world. There's more available to me in a book than in a game.
Yeah, do you know? I've heard I've heard people like writers say something similar before in terms of when they're writing their series, like if it's like a fantasy series or similar. The more they write, the more ideas that they get, and to either the point where they will just continue on their series for as long as they possibly can, or after maybe 3 or 4 books, they'll say their heartfelt goodbyes to the characters that they themselves have created and become so attached to, and then they'll
Yeah.
maybe like explore other sides of this like universe that they have
That
created.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, that's exactly the position I'm at now because I've completed the four. Well, I have 3 or 4 test readers here, and one of them's a producer who's won Emmys and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when we met to talk about the last book, I said I think the story's complete. Uh, and is that okay? Because we both love the world of
Yeah.
these books. And he said, "Oh, I love it when a story ends." And I went, "Oh, actually, you know what? He's right, because
Yeah.
that's what we're all aiming for is the end. And the fact that it's end doesn't mean it's over. I mean, I could, if I'm spared and if I have any good ideas, write sequels. I mean, for example, the next generation or two or something could come along, just as they did with Star Trek. But those 4 stories add up to a complete, uh, what would it be? Tetralogy, to use the correct Greek word. Um, or as Douglas called them, a trilogy in 4 parts. Uh, so yeah, so that's done. And instead of a sense of, oh my God, I've stopped too soon, it was, oh wow, that's complete. So if I were to die now, that's done. I'm not going to do a Robert
Mhm.
Jordan on you and leave you hanging. Um, uh, and I actually attempted to write a 5th book following on, and there's a reason it doesn't work. So I stopped that after a couple of 100 pages and said, no, it's not as good as the others. I'm not going to
Mhm.
do this. The very simple reason is that half the bloody crew is left behind. I'd reduced myself down to just a couple of them, and that's really missing a trick because part of the fun of my stories is kind of the found family of the crew
Yeah.
of the bunch of people who have all these problems to solve and as get up to mischief at the same time and go through their separate. Sometimes they're off in different directions, sometimes they're back together. So that is really the heart and soul of it in many ways.
Yeah, of
And if
course.
I can't do anything as good as the other 4 books, I'm going to drop it. But I'd love to get back in there and uh, and give it another go.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you ever want to see it come full circle and perhaps maybe a video game adaptation of your books?
Video game would be great. No, I've been asked about. I've sold the film rights. Well,
Oh.
they were optioned with
Mhm.
like 8 pence, but it means you've got a producer who likes them and wants to do something
Yeah.
about it. So I've written scripts for that. Uh, we'll see whether. I mean, I think it should be a TV series, and he thinks it. Actually, he now thinks that, because it used to think it should be a film, and then oh, whatever. So whether that ever happens or not, we don't know. But it does adapt actually quite easily. I've
Brilliant.
adapted a lot of books for
Hmm.
scripts before, so I thought I'd give it a try and see. And yeah, it could do that, but to be a video game, wow, that would be just extraordinary, wouldn't it? That would be again, why not? Yeah.
Yeah, like that's it. I mean, I kind of feel like that's almost like a bit of a lost art these days is um video games based off books. I don't feel like you really see that at all, really. Even like with films and all, it's now video game to film rather than film to video game. Because back, like in the early 2000s, it
Yeah,
used to be the video game would have accompanied the movie to obviously put more eyes on the movie.
yeah,
Hence
yeah,
why most of the video games were not fantastic, not great, but they were still playable. And but now I think it's like its own little realm now. I think like, and
yeah.
which is great. But I mean, I love the crossovers. Like I think it could with the right people involved. I think maybe bring it to life as a video game too.
Yeah, it's the landscape really has changed.
Mm,
I mean, if you're writing now for people say you've got to keep reminding the audience what they're watching. And I say,
yeah,
why? And they say, well, because they got one screen in this hand and they're watching the other thing in the other hand. And they're, what? And they're watching the movie. And so you have to make it very simple. Glad I don't work in that anymore. But that's just, it's kind of baffling. Uh, I mean, what was the Minecraft movie was one that they had the world's shortest video song, a 30-second chicken song.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
it really is changing, and I'm not sure that I quite know what the quality is uh, in in the adaptations in those cases. Uh,
yeah.
but
I think
you
it
know,
certainly depends on the like Minecraft, for example. It didn't need a movie, but was it a very healthy cash injection? Absolutely. Like, I
well, the
mean,
audience wants to see. It's a case of fans are
yeah,
very different from audiences. Fans want to see particular things, so they had to have the atomic fighting chicken or whatever the thing is that they do the song about, because the fans are expecting to see that. And if you're doing a Star Wars project these days, the fans, they're on the forums talking about this, and there's got to be that, and I've heard this, and it's very difficult to keep them all happy, and also to write a story that refreshes the uh, um, franchise, brings
yeah.
something new to it, because the fans just want to see what they already know and what's old. And if you think about it for a second, that's not going to cut it, is it? You don't.
Oh, no.
Something old is that's just a tribute to itself.
Yeah,
And
I think that people are kind of a little bit too caught up in nostalgia and lore to the point where everything that like new that comes into a franchise has to fit that lore down to a T and has to be in some way, it has to mirror the nostalgia in some way enough that they can kind of keep it going because it keeps it in the same direction. And I mean, I think when it kind of goes
it
that deep,
feels weak to me.
yeah,
The job of the artist uh, uh, is to make something that we don't expect.
exactly. Yeah.
And the job of the fan club is to someone who's making something for a fan. It's like seeing a tribute band.
Hmm.
I mean, you want to see the tribute. Geez, was it the guy, the drummer from Blondie, Clem Burke,
Hmm.
who's right, a brilliant drummer, worked with everybody. I think he died about a year ago. But his book's just coming out, and it was in one of the London papers. And he played with the Blondie tribute band because he just loved doing it. He loved performing.
Brilliant.
But I think that's absolutely so admirable.
Oh yeah.
But you've seen Pink Floyd tribute bands and the Bee Gees, the Australian Bee Gees and stuff,
Yeah.
and or AC/DC tribute bands, and they're doing what their heroes did as well as they can and giving people a good time. But
Exactly.
it is second hand. Don't know that it matters, but
No.
there's an artistic question in there that has various different answers to it.
Definitely, yeah. I think in that case, it's very much like managing the the audience and the fans' expectation in certain ways, and like if somebody goes to see a tribute band, are are they there because it's a good night out, or are they there because they genuinely want to see this particular band? I mean, I suppose there's like there's
Well,
a
I
million
think
dead
that's the
quite questions you can
question.
ask, you know.
I think that is it. Well, my great hero in music is Billy Strings these days, and I've seen him 4 times. He just toured Ireland, by the way,
Oh, nice.
and God, he's amazing. But when he does a Grateful Dead number or a Pink Floyd number, it comes out of a bluegrass number and goes into something else, and it's him reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
And he's just the most incredible musician, as the rest of his band are.
Mhm.
So it's not like doing straight tribute, but you go, oh my God, he's playing.
Yeah.
It's Black Sabbath, having just been, um, Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs.
Mm.
Uh,
No,
and I love that. So there's nothing wrong with playing other people's songs. And
no, absolutely not. Like, because that's the sort of, it adds in that kind of unexpected element, but memorable when you go to a show. Like, even if even if you're not at a tribute act and someone plays a cover, it's like you're likely going to remember that, like, over a lot of the other set to a degree as well, just because it's something so unexpected and so memorable.
also in the bluegrass and folk world, there's a lot of people saying that just it has to be done this way. Which is amazing. And I've sat, you're sitting around, and if you're all banjo players, you always play Foggy Mountain Breakdown. And then, some people chastise and say, well, Earl didn't play it like that. you know, and they're talking to players who are world class as well as hacks like me. And some guys saying, "Well, I want Earl played it different every time,"
Yeah.
and so you go, "Oh, okay," and then they will demonstrate and do something completely different with it. And the old purists are going, "No, that's not the way Earl played it." So the stick in the muddery is. I can see that point, and purism is yes, this is the archetype, but still, no, you got to mess around with it. You got to bring it to
Yeah.
life rather.
Exactly. Because like if you kind of like took that attitude and like applied that to all other mediums of art and entertainment, then it wouldn't be as creative or as enjoyable. I mean, there was always going to be gatekeepers and like purists, but
Yeah.
I mean, I
Perfect
think
words.
you,
I mean, look, take the great tradition of the session in Irish pubs.
mm,
When you go there, what you want to hear is it live. You don't want to hear it done like that, but you don't want to hear it. There might be in one pub there might be four fiddlers and an
yeah,
accordion,
for
and
sure,
another pub there might be one and a mandolin and a bouzouki, and you just want to hear the tune brought to life and played well.
exactly.
It doesn't have to be, a museum piece.
Exactly. Yeah. Like it's just ultimately it's just appreciating the art for what it is as a whole, really. I think, and it's that's why artists do what artists do.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
it's
oh,
an
my
expression.
favorite Irish session. It was actually in a pub in Camden Town in London.
Really.
I went along to play, and I play five-string banjo, which is not four-string, so you can't do the triples and the picks. So
Hmm.
I really just chunk along in the background and do filling. And the old guys who always known each other forever, and one of them because they always played songs in threes.
Hmm.
One song goes to the next, goes to the next. A set, it's called, and one guy looked at another old guy and said, "Let's play the one that goes before the one that comes after it." And, all right, and off they go. And, the chords are pretty simple, so you figure out
Yeah.
it's E minor, A minor, G, C, whatever, and bumble along. But what a great way to go into it. And oh God, they were good.
Yeah. No, that's it. Like I think it's yeah, one of the oldest sort of mediums of entertainment, live music, and it certainly is. One of the best, and I think it's one that has stood the test of time for the right reasons. Definitely, and it's yeah, it's just
Well, there
like
is
I
a
say, just
there is
like
a
any live art, really.
and also it is believed, and I certainly believe it, that song is older than speech, music is older than words, because that's how like birds have been communicating
Oh
in
yeah,
song for millions of years.
it's a very good point.
And
Yeah.
music speaks to us. It
Oh, for
really
sure,
does.
100%. Yeah, like it's yeah, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Big fan of music and just arts and storytelling in general. It's right up my street anyway, as I'm sure it is for yourself. But Richard, it has been an absolute pleasure having you
Well,
on Behind the Camera podcast. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an amazing conversation. I would just like to give you the floor just before we wrap up for where the listeners can find you and your work, and of course the new rock book series as well.
well, thank you very much for having me, Andy,
My
apart from
pleasure.
anything else. If you go to my website, which is richardsparks.com, there's no E in Sparks, you can get free samples of each of the three books are out now. The fourth final one comes out this year. So you can get a free chapter of each book to download or a free audio chapter with me reading it, one from each book. So that will give you a taste of it. And if you enjoy it, well, great. Thank you. Come on in, enjoy the rest of the stories. My aim is to entertain people. So um, if you like the idea of an adventure, check it out at richardsparks.com.
Amazing stuff. Yes, definitely be sure to check that out. And once again, Richard, thank you very much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
And there you have it for episode 110 of Behind the Camera. Massive thanks to Richard Sparks for being this week's guest. Be sure to check out Richard and his work on the new rock series on his website, link in the description. As always, thank you to all patrons for your support. You're all truly appreciated. And of course, if you would like to stay connected with Behind the Camera, check out my link tree in the description for all socials and my book, Behind the Camera, The Journey So Far. Thank you for listening, for the support, and for being part of the journey. Until next time, take care, stay creative, and I'll see you soon. But until then, Peace.